Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, has seen his power and popularity plummet since he made the fateful decision to invade Ukraine back in 2022. His country has been isolated, its economy has been ravaged, its army has failed to achieve almost any of its stated objectives, and he himself has never looked weaker. But Putin has always had one all-important lifeline to cling to: oil. The lifeblood of the global economy, oil has long been Russia's top export, bringing in enough money to prop up the country's floundering finances and keep the Kremlin's war machine chugging along. Unfortunately for Putin, that lifeline may now be severed. Ukraine has utterly annihilated Russia's oil sector, and there's no way back from here. And it's not like Putin wasn't warned. Ukrainian forces have made their intentions clear for quite some time. In fact, they've been targeting pieces of Russia's oil infrastructure, like refineries, oil production plants, storage facilities, tankers, and pipelines since the early stages of the war, but really ramped up the intensity in 2025, launching greater numbers of attacks on the most critical pieces of the Kremlin's energy sector. Time and time again, reports poured in of major oil refineries being set ablaze or tankers being blown away in nighttime drone raids and surprise missile strikes. Over and over, Russia saw countless gallons of oil quite literally go up in smoke, forced to watch on as its production and export capacities were slashed to smaller and smaller levels, directly impacting its exports and profit potential. They did what they could to defend these sites, setting up air defenses and even calling up the country's reservists in a desperate attempt to guard critical infrastructure sites and prevent further disruption. But nothing worked. The attacks have continued, and Ukraine isn't easing off. In fact, it's doing the exact opposite, increasing the intensity of its attacks and piling ever more pressure onto Russia's most important industry. This has culminated in what Reuters and other media organizations have deemed the most severe oil supply disruption in modern Russian history. And the stats back that up. Reports show that Russia's oil export capacity has dropped by a staggering 40%. That works out at around 2 million barrels per day. 2 million barrels that Russia used to be able to sell to various nations around the world every single day, bringing in enormous amounts of money for its economy over the course of the average year. 2 million barrels that help to feed the Kremlin's war machine, allowing Russia to continue fueling its vehicles, paying its soldiers' salaries, and making more bombs, missiles, and drones to fire at Ukrainian towns and cities. A vital, fundamental source of revenue and support, severely reduced by Ukraine. And that didn't happen overnight. It's the result of a long-running campaign involving a series of targeted precision strikes, demanding expert planning and flawless execution. Those strikes took place throughout 2025 and have continued into 2026, with Ukraine regularly identifying new targets, putting plans in place to damage or destroy them, and executing those plans with ruthless efficiency. In March 2026 alone, for example, there were several major attacks on some of the most important oil sites in Russia. At the very start of the month, for example, Ukraine carried out a strike on the Novorossiysk oil terminal. Situated in the Krasnodar Krai region, looking out over the waters of the Black Sea, this port city is an extremely important location for oil exports. At the Sheshkaras oil facility, millions of barrels are received from other refineries and stored at this location before being loaded onto tankers. Many of those tankers form part of Russia's infamous shadow fleet, a clandestine network made up of hundreds of transport vessels that defy international sanctions by continuing to transport oil out of Russia to other nations and funnel funds into the country to keep the war going. Overnight on March 2nd, however, local eyewitnesses reported that the Sheshkaris oil terminal had been set ablaze after Ukrainian drones entered the area. The local mayor, Andrei Kravchenko, confirmed the attack, with local residents posting images and videos online showing the facility on fire. This wasn't even the first time the facility had been hit. Back in November of 2025, for example, oil loadings at Novorossiysk were temporarily suspended after a Ukrainian strike. Later the same month, the Sheshkaris facility was once again struck by Ukraine. Since the most recent attack, reports say that this oil terminal, which is typically capable of handling up to 700,000 barrels of oil on a daily basis, has been operating far below its peak capacities. Only a couple of weeks later, on March 16th, reports emerged of another successful Ukrainian strike, also in Krasnodar Krai, this time in the town of Lubinsk, which sits beside the Bolshaya Laba River, over 300 miles, 500 kilometers, from the front lines of the war. Overnight at around 2 a.m., to be more precise, Ukrainian drone crews targeted the town's oil depot, a vital node connecting Russia's fuel production facilities to frontline military operations in the southern regions of Ukraine. Local telegram channels began reporting explosions close to the oil depot in the early hours of the morning, with videos and images soon emerging, showing flames licking the air and plumes of smoke filling the skies above several fuel storage tanks. The fire reportedly continued well into the morning, and with every minute that passed, more and more of Russia's most precious and valuable resource was lost. It took 4 firefighting crews, along with teams of rescue personnel, to finally control and ultimately extinguish the blaze with even more manpower. But by then, the damage was already done, and even more was on the way. March 21st. Just 5 days after the Lubinsk attack, Ukraine's drones struck again. This time, their drones were spotted in the skies above the Saratov oil refinery, situated in southwestern Russia in the Saratov region. Owned and operated by the state-owned company Rosneft, this is one of the oldest oil refineries in Russia still in operation. It's exceptionally large, with an extraordinary oil processing volume of around 4.8 million tons. It's a key cog in the Russian oil machine, capable of producing more than 20 different varieties of fuel and chemical products, including gasoline, diesel, and fuel oil. It also produces vacuum gas oil and technical sulfur, 2 more important ingredients powering Russia's industrial complexes and military machines. Unsurprisingly, this place was identified early on as a priority target for Ukrainian forces. They've hit it over a dozen times since the war began, and the March 21st strike was one of the most effective, forcing the refinery to completely shut down operations. According to the Astra Telegram channel, which cited official sources from the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations, a secondary oil processing unit and large vertical storage tank were damaged in the attack. A diesel fuel tank with a capacity of a whopping 10,000 tons was also set ablaze, with the subsequent fire spreading across a vast area of at least 4,300 square feet, 400 square meters. On top of that, debris from the drones also fell onto a nearby thermal power plant, dealing additional damage. All of this was the result of the hard work and careful preparation of Ukraine's world-leading drone warfare teams, including the 1st Separate Center, 414th Magyar's Birds Brigade, and the 413th Raid Regiment, in coordination with other Ukrainian Defense Force teams. Rosneft has seen its facilities, like the Saratov refinery, damaged so heavily and so often that it's been desperately seeking new ways to protect them. But whatever it's doing, it's not working. Nothing seems able to stop Ukraine's drones, which can seemingly strike in any location, at any time, even in places that are hundreds of miles into Russian territory, in locations that should, in theory, be relatively safe. And the worst was still to come for Russia, because the final weeks of March 2026 had several more strikes in store, even larger and more devastating than those that had come before, leaving the country's oil industry in its most perilous position in years. Before we go deeper into that, you're watching The Military Show, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. By the latter stages of March, Russia was reeling. Not only were its ground forces continuing to struggle to make any major advances, with one assault team after another being wiped out by Ukraine's defenders, but its oil infrastructure had taken several crippling hits, courtesy of Kyiv's drones. Then came the attack on the Primorsk oil terminal. Located in the Leningrad region, not too far from the border between Russia and Finland, Primorsk is the second biggest Russian Baltic port after St. Petersburg. It's an enormously important location for Russian oil exports across the Baltic Sea, handling literally tens of millions of crude and petroleum products every single year. It's also the endpoint of the Baltic pipeline system, as well as a central point for Russia's shadow fleet shipments. Many of these privately owned tankers travel in and out of Primorsk's port on a regular basis, exporting Ural's crude oil outside official channels, providing an illicit but profitable source of revenue for the Kremlin. Even minor damage to such a critical location can have serious impacts on Russian energy shipments and surrounding infrastructure. But Ukraine wasn't introduced in minor damage. It wanted to set the port ablaze, causing as much disruption and devastation as possible. So, overnight on March 23rd, Kyiv's forces launched a large-scale drone attack, with numerous drones swarming towards Primorsk. This was part of a much larger strike in which Russian officials reportedly downed close to 250 drones over multiple regions, including Leningrad, Kursk, Moscow, and Belgorod. Despite Russian air defenses in the area, some of Ukraine's drones successfully made contact with their targets, triggering a large fire at the extensive oil export hub. Personnel were quickly evacuated and operations halted as the fire spread, with damage reported to both the tank park and the oil handling infrastructure. The region's governor, Alexander Drozdenko, confirmed that a drone had struck a fuel storage tank, which is how the fire began. Fire crews were dispatched to the site but struggled to contain the blaze, with social media images showing thick plumes of black smoke rising above the facility for several days following the attack. Satellite images also confirmed that at least 4 separate fuel tanks had caught fire, and though the facility was eventually able to start operating again, it did so at a massively reduced capacity. On March 25th, the drones came again, setting another Russian oil port, Ust-Luga, on fire. Despite being situated around 620 miles, 1,000 kilometers away from the Ukrainian border, Kyiv's incredible drone teams were able to successfully send their unmanned aerial vehicles all the way to this Baltic Sea base in the northwestern part of Russia's Leningrad region. Governor Drozdenko was once again forced to be the bearer of bad news, telling the Russian public that firefighters had been called out to battle yet another blaze. Drozdenko also attempted to play down the impact of the attack, but social media reports and images posted online told a very different story, with residents counting at least 10 explosions in the area. Locals also spoke of a huge, glowing fire lighting up the night sky, along with a tower of black smoke filling the air by the time dawn had broken. Again, this attack focused on one of the most productive pieces of Russia's oil industry. The Ust-Luga port is said to be able to handle around 700,000 barrels of oil every single day. It's also a hugely important production site, processing up to 45 billion cubic meters of natural gas each year and producing around 13 million tons of liquefied natural gas, LNG, as well as millions more tons of ethane and liquefied petroleum gas, LPG. Since it's such an important location, it's been targeted by Ukraine on several occasions, with the first major strike by the Security Service of Ukraine occurring way back in January 2024, with a second attack carried out in August 2025. The March 2026 strike is just the latest crippling blow to this beleaguered facility, with various reports stating that the entire terminal, which also exports other goods like coal, grain, and fertilizer, had to be sealed off and shut down while firefighters battled the blaze. In the days that followed, officials have struggled to get the port back up and running, and it may be quite some time before it reaches anything close to peak operating capacity. And the Leningrad region's oil nightmare still wasn't over. Overnight on March 26th, yet another large-scale drone attack occurred. This time, Ukraine's drones converged around one of Russia's biggest oil refineries, the Kirishi Petroleum Organic Synthesis, or KNF refinery, situated not far from St. Petersburg, Russia's second-largest city. Owned by another of Russia's top gas companies, this plant is capable of refining up to 20 million tons of oil each year, which makes it the second-largest refinery in the entire country in terms of processing capacity. It produces colossal amounts of fuel and petrochemicals that are both used domestically within Russia and shipped out to trade partners around the world. On March 26, over 20 Ukrainian drones struck critical infrastructure in and around this location, with Regional Governor Alexander Drozdenko, yet again, having to step up to the microphone and report on what had happened. As Russian governors often do in cases like this, Drozdenko tried to focus on the positives, noting that air defense systems in the area had successfully repelled various Ukrainian drones, and adding that there had been no reported casualties. He did, however, concede that an unnamed industrial zone had sustained some damage, and while the Russian Defense Ministry boasted about shooting down around 125 Ukrainian fixed-wing drones the very same night, the country was also forced to shut down flight operations at several of its most important airports, including Sheremetyevo in Moscow and Pulkovo in St. Petersburg. Attacks like these are not going to stop. In fact, they're likely to only get more intense and devastating the longer the war goes on because, in the early days, Ukraine had to focus much more on defending its territory and fending off Russian assaults. It didn't have the time or resources to dedicate to counterattacks, nor did it have the assets necessary for deep precision strikes on Russian territory, like drones and missiles. Now, it's a completely different story. Ukraine has worked miracles developing its domestic defense industry from the ground up, with hundreds of new companies springing up and setting themselves to work crafting new, long-range missiles and innovative unmanned aircraft that are tough enough to take out Russian infrastructure. The country's defense forces have also become much more adept at dealing with Russian attacks along the front lines, discovering and mastering effective tactics like the bait and bleed strategy, in which Russian units are lured into veritable death traps before being wiped out by drones and artillery fire from the surrounding areas. This, in turn, has finally freed up Ukraine's military to not merely carry out an odd strike back against Russia here and there, but to launch a concentrated, coordinated campaign of deep strikes on the Kremlin's most high-value assets and pieces of infrastructure. Pipelines, refineries, tankers, ports, and more are being systematically found, targeted, and blown up. And while Ukraine may not yet have the firepower to destroy these facilities entirely, every bit of damage, no matter how small, still adds up. Every drone plays its part, every impact matters, and every fire and explosion results in loss and damage for Russia to worry about. And every time one of these major sites is struck, it almost always has to be taken offline temporarily while personnel are evacuated, fires are extinguished, and damaged areas are inspected and repaired. In facilities as big as this, even a few hours of downtime can cost millions of dollars. So when Ukraine is able to put several refineries out of action for several days at a time, that really matters. It hits Putin and his Kremlin cronies where they feel it most, their wallets. Each of these attacks damages Russia's economy, making it that much harder to bring in the money they need to keep the war going. And with the country already struggling with recruitment, suffering more casualties than it can cope with, while also failing to make any major gains on the ground, the situation facing Putin is looking increasingly grim. He's stuck in a war he has no chance of winning, against an opponent that goes stronger by the day. His country's economy is in tatters. Many of his allies have all but abandoned him. The international community continues to cut off his people and punish his oligarchs. And the one lifeline he'd been so desperately clinging to all this time, his prosperous oil industry, has reached its weakest ever point. For Ukraine, meanwhile, the tactic of targeting oil infrastructure is most certainly paying off. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly claimed that crushing Russia's oil industry is the fastest and most efficient way to bring this war to an end, and the data is proving him right. If Ukraine can keep up these kinds of attacks, or even take them up a notch with additional drones or even missile strikes, Putin will be left with no other option but to withdraw his troops or watch his entire country burn to the ground. Learn more about how bad the war has become for Russia in this video, which looks at how Ukraine turned the tables on its aggressor, dishing out one of the deadliest and most devastating days of the conflict so far. Or, for something a little different, check out this video, which explores how Ukraine has started to deploy next-generation, science fiction-style humanoid robots as part of its frontline operations. Don't forget to subscribe to the Military Show, too, for more breaking news and insightful analysis of the latest military issues around the world.